A young boy, held as a slave, performed a heroic act that saved his owner's wife from a terrible fire. And in that moment, everything changed. The year was 1832. In South Carolina, vast plantations were stark symbols of cruelty and injustice. Yet one extraordinary action of courage was about to challenge the very foundation of this brutal system. What happened within those terrifying flames didn't just save a woman's life. It started a chain of events no one could have predicted. This is the forgotten tale of how a child born into bondage changed his own future through one unbelievable act of bravery. Elijah was just 12 years old when his life on the Wilks plantation took a pivotal turn. Though small, he was remarkably bright. He moved through the endless cotton fields of South Carolina like a shadow, always present, but rarely truly seen. His thin body concealed the deep strength he'd gained from years of work that began almost as soon as he learned to walk. Born in the slave quarters behind the massive, white-columned mansion, Elijah had never known a life outside the service of the Wilks family. Master Jonathan Wilks ran his estate with calculated precision. The land stretched for miles, worked by over 100 enslaved people who lived in fear of his notorious temper. A third-generation plantation owner, Wilks prided himself on what he called an enlightened method of management. This meant he preferred docking pay and reducing food rations over using the whip, though the latter was still a very real part of plantation life. The summer of 1832 was very profitable, cotton prices were high, and the Wilks estate produced record amounts. But it was Master Wilks' wife, Mrs. Sarah Wilks, who noticed something special in young Elijah. She was a quiet, northern-born woman who sometimes showed a kindness that confused the enslaved people around her. Mrs. Wilks chose Elijah for house service after she saw him helping younger children learn their chores. "That boy has eyes that see everything," she once told her husband during dinner while Elijah stood silently by the dining room wall. "There's an intelligence in him that's quite remarkable." Unlike the other house slaves, Elijah was assigned to assist Mrs. Wilks with her personal needs, fetching her medicine, carrying her books, and standing quietly while she taught her own children lessons in the sunlit room overlooking the gardens. What no one understood was how carefully Elijah was watching, learning, and memorizing every detail of the Wilks household. Each night after his grueling 16-hour workday, back in the small cabin he shared with his elderly grandmother, Nettie, he would silently repeat the words he'd overheard from Mrs. Wilks' reading lessons. He would secretly trace letters in the dirt floor. Every day, he observed how power flowed through the plantation, how Master Wilks' voice softened for wealthy visitors but turned to cold steel when addressing the field hands. He saw how Mrs. Wilks sometimes gave extra food to pregnant women, but quickly looked away when punishments were happening. The other enslaved people noticed Elijah's position, too. Older house servants warned him to be cautious. "Don't you get too comfortable," whispered Esther, the cook, who had been there for 30 years. "The closer you get to them, the further you need to keep your true self hidden." His grandmother would stroke his head and murmur, "The Lord gave you that quick mind for a reason, child, but quick minds need slow tongues on this plantation." But Elijah's growing awareness was a growing danger. The overseer, Mr. Daniels, a red-faced man with huge hands and the smell of cheap liquor on his breath, had begun watching him with suspicion. Daniels had a reputation for getting maximum work with minimum compassion and especially disliked the house slaves, seeing them as spoiled and soft. "That boy's getting ideas," he warned Master Wilks one evening. "I see him watching and listening to things that aren't his concern. He's getting too comfortable around your wife and children. Maybe it's time to send him out to the fields where he belongs." Master Wilks just nodded noncommittally. "Sarah finds him useful, we'll see." What Elijah couldn't know was that in just 3 days, those same suspicious eyes would be looking at him very differently, and the flames that would change everything were already building. The dry summer had turned the wooden structures of the plantation into perfect tinder. The oil lamps Mrs. Wilks used for reading were accidents waiting to happen. As Elijah helped prepare the house for nightfall, tidying Mrs. Wilks' reading room and turning down the beds, he had no idea his place in this world was about to be violently overturned. The evening of August 17th started normally. Dinner was served at 7 with Master Wilks hosting 2 cotton traders from Charleston. The air was thick with humidity, promising a storm that hadn't arrived. Elijah quietly moved between the kitchen and dining room, fetching water and wine as directed. "More wine for the gentleman, boy," Master Wilks ordered without looking up. Elijah obeyed, careful not to spill a drop on the expensive imported tablecloth that Mrs. Wilks treasured. One servant had been severely punished for staining it previously. Elijah had no desire to share that fate. The dinner talk focused on cotton prices and the rising political tensions between South Carolina and the federal government. Words like nullification and tariffs drifted over the table like smoke, important to the men but abstract to Elijah, who still committed them to memory. He had learned that knowledge was the one thing no one could take from him. "I tell you, gentlemen, this Yankee interference won't stand," Master Wilks declared, his face flushed with wine and anger. "South Carolina must assert her rights or lose everything we've built." The younger broker agreed fiercely. The older, more cautious one frowned into his glass. "Careful talk, gentlemen. These are dangerous times for rash declarations." Mrs. Wilks at the other end of the long mahogany table subtly cleared her throat. "Perhaps we could find a more suitable topic for dinner." Her eyes flashed meaningfully toward the servants standing against the wall, including Elijah. Master Wilks waved his hand dismissively. "They don't understand such things, my dear. Besides, they have no one to tell but each other." He laughed, and his guests joined him, though the older broker's eyes lingered on Elijah for a moment too long. By 9 o'clock, the guests had left, and the house settled into its night routine. Master Wilks went to his study with his ledgers and pipe, while Mrs. Wilks went to a second-floor reading room. Their 3 children were already asleep. "Elijah, bring my reading lamp and be sure it's full," Mrs. Wilks called as she went up the stairs. "And fetch that new novel from the library, the one Mr. Wilks brought from Charleston." Elijah quickly completed these tasks, filling the heavy brass lamp with fresh whale oil and carefully trimming the wick as he'd been taught. The summer night was completely still. There wasn't a whisper of wind through the open windows. The air felt like a held breath, the kind that comes just before major events. In the library, he found the leather-bound novel with gold writing on the spine. He couldn't read the title, but he recognized the shapes of the letters, having secretly practiced them in dirt and ash. One day, he promised himself, he would understand the mysterious marks that white people used to capture thoughts on paper. After delivering the lamp and book to Mrs. Wilks, Elijah was dismissed. "That will be all," she said, already engrossed in the first pages of her novel. "Tell Martha I don't wish to be disturbed again tonight." The reading room was Mrs. Wilks' private haven, a small, elegant space lit only by the golden glow of the oil lamp. The flame created dancing shadows on the walls. He had just reached the servants' stairs at the back of the house when the first thunderclap shook the windows. The storm had finally arrived, and immediately rain began to beat against the house with unexpected force. Lightning lit up the hallway in brilliant flashes as Elijah walked downstairs, casting his shadow in sharp contrast against the wall. Long one moment, gone the next. In the kitchen, the remaining house servants prepared for their own rest. Martha was covering the cooking fire while Samuel and 2 younger servants, Leula and James, shared the last pieces of bread. "This storm is a bad one," observed old Samuel, his weathered face lined by 60 years of labor. He worriedly watched as another thunderclap rattled the windows. "Been too dry too long. The earth's going to flood tonight." "The mistress is reading," Elijah reported to Martha. "Says she doesn't want to be disturbed." Martha nodded, wiping her hands on her apron. "Lord, help her if she falls asleep with that lamp burning. Remember what happened at the Prescott plantation last spring. The whole family almost burned alive." Leula quickly made the sign of the cross. "Don't speak such things, Martha. It's bad luck." "It ain't luck that burns houses, girl. It's carelessness," Martha sharply replied. "Elijah, help me cover these embers properly. James, make sure the back door is tightly latched against this wind." Elijah was helping Martha cover the fire when they heard it, a sound unlike the thunder. A sharp crack followed by a heavy thud from above. It wasn't the house settling nor a storm noise. This was something else. "What was that?" Martha froze, her eyes scanning the ceiling, trying to locate the sound's source. Before anyone could answer, a high-pitched, terrified scream pierced through the sound of the rain. "Mrs. Wilks!" The sound cut through the kitchen like a knife, instantly changing the atmosphere from weary calm to urgent panic. "Sweet Jesus," whispered Leula, gripping Samuel's arm. Elijah didn't hesitate. He was already moving, racing back up the servants' stairs. Behind him, he could hear Martha calling for James to find Master Wilks, her voice already fatting as Elijah took the steps 2 at a time, his heart pounding in his chest. The smell hit him first, smoke, thick and biting with the distinct scent of burning cloth and paper. Then he saw it. Flames were licking up the wallpaper outside Mrs. Wilks' reading room, orange tongues greedily consuming the delicate floral pattern. Inside, through the half-open door, he could see Mrs. Wilks trapped behind a fallen bookcase that was now on fire. The oil lamp lay broken on the floor, its contents feeding the rapidly spreading flames that were already reaching the curtains. "Help, Jonathan, anyone!" Mrs. Wilks cried out. Her white nightdress was already scorched, the lace on its hem turning black in the heat. She struggled to push the heavy bookcase away, but it wouldn't move. Her usually composed face was twisted with fear, her hair coming loose around her shoulders. Elijah hesitated for only a second. Master Wilks' study was across the house. By the time anyone reached her, it might be too late. The flames were growing higher, fiercely consuming the books and papers that covered the room. The heat was already so intense that he felt it from the doorway, like standing too close to the cooking fire. A rational voice in his mind, sounding like his grandmother, told him to run. Risking his life for his owner's wife was senseless. What slave would willingly run toward danger for their captors? But another part of him, perhaps the part that longed for knowledge and dreamed of letters, couldn't turn away. Pulling his thin shirt over his nose and mouth, Elijah plunged into the smoke-filled room. The heat was instantly overwhelming, searing his exposed skin and making his eyes water. The smoke was worse, choking his lungs and making every breath a struggle. He could barely see Mrs. Wilks through the heavy gray cloud. "Mrs. Wilks, this way!" he shouted, dropping to his knees where the air was slightly clearer. The floor beneath him was hot, the expensive carpet was beginning to burn. "Elijah, is that you? I can't move this, it's too heavy." Her voice was weaker now, raspy with smoke and fear. Crawling forward, Elijah reached the fallen bookcase. It had trapped Mrs. Wilks against her reading chair. The top of the case was already engulfed in flames that threatened to drop burning pieces onto her at any moment. Books, those precious objects of knowledge he desired, were now deadly fuel, their pages curling and blackening in the heat. With strength born of desperation, Elijah braced himself against the floor and shoved the bookcase. His muscles screamed in protest, the veins in his neck bulging as he strained against the massive weight. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the heavy oak piece moved, just an inch at first, then enough for Mrs. Wilks to squeeze free. "Come," he commanded, forgetting all proper behavior as he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. A burning book fell from above, landing on his shoulder. He barely registered the pain as they stumbled together toward the hallway, though he would later find a burn shaped like a book corner branded into his skin, a strange kind of literacy marked on his flesh. The corridor was also filling with smoke, but it wasn't as thick. Elijah could hear shouting from downstairs. The entire household was awake and aware. Master Wilks' voice rose above the others, calling his wife's name with increasing panic. Supporting Mrs. Wilks, who was coughing violently and struggling to stand, Elijah guided her toward the main staircase. Her nightdress was torn and blackened in places, her bare feet left sooty prints on the polished wooden floor. She leaned heavily against him, her arm around his shoulders in a closeness that would have been unthinkable hours before. "The children," she gasped between coughs. "The children are in the other wing, ma'am," he assured her, though he wasn't totally certain. "The fire hasn't reached there." They were halfway down the grand staircase when Master Wilks appeared below, his face a mask of fear. Behind him, several house servants and the 2 field hands who served as night watchmen clustered in the entrance hall, their faces illuminated by the strange, flickering light from above. "Sarah," he cried out, taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach them. His usual control was shattered, his hair was messy, and his eyes were wild with panic. "Jonathan," Mrs. Wilks collapsed into her husband's arms, her face streaked with soot and tears. "The lamp fell when the thunder startled me, the bookcase. I couldn't." Her words dissolved into another fit of coughing. Master Wilks looked over his wife's head at Elijah, who stood swaying slightly, his shirt smoldering in spots, his hands and face blackened with soot and dotted with burns. Their eyes met in a moment of strange equality. They were 2 men who had just faced the possibility of unimaginable loss. "You got her out?" Master Wilks asked, his voice oddly quiet amid the chaos. There was disbelief in his question, as if he couldn't connect the scene before him with everything he thought he knew about the world. Elijah nodded once, then dropped to his knees as the world spun. The smoke in his lungs, the burns on his skin, and the sheer exhaustion of the rescue suddenly overwhelmed him. The last thing he saw before passing out was the expression on Master Wilks' face, a complex mix of gratitude, confusion, and something else Elijah had never seen directed at him before. It looked almost like respect. Behind them, the upper floor of the east wing was now completely consumed by flames, bright against the stormy night sky. As household members rushed to form a bucket chain from the well, and field hands were woken from their quarters to help fight the blaze, no one yet understood that more than a part of the Wilks mansion was being transformed by fire that night. The established order of their world had just begun to burn. Outside, the rain continued, but it was too little against the hungry flames. Lightning still flashed, illuminating the faces of the enslaved people who worked desperately to save their master's home. Some whispered that this was God's judgment, while others feared the punishment that would follow if the house couldn't be saved. In the confusion, no one noticed Elijah's grandmother, Nettie, standing slightly apart, her aged eyes fixed not on the burning house, but on the unconscious body of her grandson being carried to safety. Her lips moved in a silent prayer that had nothing to do with saving the Wilks plantation and everything to do with the spark of possibility that had been ignited this night. A different kind of fire altogether. Dawn arrived over the Wilks plantation, revealing the full extent of the night's damage. The east wing of the mansion was in ruins, its elegant walls reduced to black timbers and collapsed rubble. Smoke still rose from the debris, curling into the pale morning sky like ghostly fingers. The sharp smell of burnt wood, fabric, and paper hung in the air, a constant reminder of how quickly wealth and comfort could disappear. The household had worked all night to control the fire. A long line of people passing buckets had managed to save the main structure and the west wing, though water damage had ruined ceilings and walls. Field hands had been roused to help, working alongside house servants in a temporary break from the usual strict social rules of the plantation. Master Wilks stood on what was left of the east veranda, surveying the damage with tired eyes. His usually perfect appearance was gone. His shirt was untucked, his face was smeared with soot, and his hair was messy from running his hands through it all night. Next to him stood Mr. Daniels, the overseer, whose expression shifted between concern for his employer and calculating how this disaster might affect his own job. "We'll need to bring in carpenters from Charleston," Master Wilks said, his voice rough from shouting orders all night. "And a new shipment of furniture, the library." He stopped, the loss of his book collection seemingly more upsetting than the structural damage. "Yes, sir," Daniels replied. "And what about the regular work? The cotton in the south fields is ready for picking." Master Wilks waved his hand dismissively. "That continues as planned. I want 10 men assigned to clearing this debris, the rest to the fields. The women can handle washing everything that smells of smoke." "And the boy?" Daniels asked, his tone carefully neutral. "The one who pulled out Mrs. Wilks." At this, Master Wilks turned to face his overseer fully. A complex mixture of emotions, unusual for a man who generally only showed satisfaction or anger, flickered across his features. "Elijah," he said, testing the weight of the name. "Where is he now?" "In the old smokehouse with the doctor," Mrs. Wilks insisted. Master Wilks nodded slowly. "And how badly is he hurt?" Daniels shrugged. "Burns on his hands and arms, breathed in a lot of smoke. Doctor says he'll live, but he might not be useful for a while." "I see." Master Wilks turned back to the ruins, his outline sharp against the morning light. "When the doctor is finished, tell him I wish to speak with him. And Daniels," he paused, choosing his next words with unusual care, "the boy is not to return to regular duties until I say otherwise." "Sir," Daniels couldn't hide his surprise. "You heard me. Now go organize those work details." As Daniels left, Master Wilks remained by the window, his thoughts as complicated as the tangled, burnt beams before him. In the old smokehouse, quickly turned into a temporary clinic, Elijah lay on a bed of clean straw covered with linen. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his pain spiking whenever the doctor treated his burns. Through half-closed eyes, he saw the unusual scene around him. Dr. Harrison, who normally only treated the Wilks family and occasionally the most valuable slaves, was personally applying medicine to Elijah's hands. Mrs. Wilks herself sat nearby on a stool, her usual elegant clothes replaced by a simple dress borrowed from Martha. She had minor burns herself, and a bandage wrapped around her left wrist where a falling ember had landed. "Will there be permanent scars, doctor?" Mrs. Wilks asked, her voice still hoarse from smoke. Dr. Harrison, a heavy man with spectacles that kept slipping, nodded seriously. "Some, I'm afraid, especially on his left hand and forearm, but he's young. The skin will heal better than it would for you or me." Elijah tried to understand this conversation through his pain and exhaustion. Why was Mrs. Wilks worried about his scars? Why was he getting the doctor's personal attention instead of the quick treatment usually given to injured slaves? "He saved my life," Mrs. Wilks said softly, almost to herself. "If he hadn't come when he did." The doctor made a quiet sound as he wrapped clean bandages around Elijah's hands. Remarkable clear-headedness for one so young. Most would have run the other way. From his bed, Elijah could see his grandmother, Nettie, standing quietly in the corner. Her face showed no emotion, but her eyes never left him, communicating a mix of pride and worry that needed no words. The door opened, letting a beam of morning sunlight cut across the dim room. Martha entered, carrying a tray with a teapot and cups. "Master says the doctor is to report to him when he's finished here," she announced, setting down the tray. Then, in a low voice meant only for Mrs. Wilks, "The children are asking for you, ma'am. Miss Elizabeth is very upset about her room." Mrs. Wilks sighed, the weight of being a mother briefly replacing her concern for Elijah. "I'll come shortly. Thank you, Martha." She rose from the stool, smoothing her borrowed dress. "Doctor, please inform my husband that I've authorized whatever treatment the boy needs for a full recovery." As she moved toward the door, she paused beside Elijah's bed. For a moment, she seemed about to speak directly to him, something rarely done except to give orders. Instead, she simply touched his shoulder lightly, a gesture so unexpected that Elijah forgot to hide his surprise. After Mrs. Wilks left, the doctor finished his work in silence. When he too had gone, only Nettie remained with her grandson. She approached slowly, her joints stiff from age and a lifetime of labor. Kneeling beside him with difficulty, she examined his bandaged hands and the angry red marks on his face and neck. "You did a foolish thing, child," she whispered, her rough hand gently stroking his forehead. "A brave thing, but foolish all the same." Elijah tried to speak, but his throat felt as if he'd swallowed fire. He managed only a raw whisper. "Had to, Grandma." Nettie's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with wisdom, studied him intently. "Things are going to change now. I can feel it in these old bones. Change isn't always good for our kind." "Master Wilks," Elijah began. "Hush now," Nettie interrupted. "Save your strength. And remember this, my Elijah, white folks' gratitude is like morning dew. It looks like diamonds in the sunrise, but it burns away by noon." She leaned closer, her voice even lower. "Whatever comes next, don't you forget who you are and where you come from. Your mama didn't live to see you grow, but she'd be proud of your heart. Just make sure that heart stays wise as well as good." Elijah wanted to ask what she meant, but exhaustion was pulling him back toward sleep. As his eyes closed, he heard the smokehouse door open again and Daniel's voice, unusually subdued, telling his grandmother she was needed back in the quarters. The last thing Elijah felt before sleep claimed him was a strange, new feeling taking root in his chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it, something dangerous. 3 days later, Elijah sat on a wooden bench outside the kitchen, his bandaged hands resting in his lap. The doctor had said he was well enough to leave the smokehouse, but still unfit for work. This strange in-between state, neither sick enough for constant care nor well enough for labor, put him in an unprecedented position on the plantation. The other slaves looked at him with a mix of awe, jealousy, and suspicion. Some, like Martha and Samuel, treated him with new kindness, slipping him extra food and speaking in softer tones. Others, especially those who competed for favored household positions, watched him with narrowed eyes, waiting for his fall from this unexpected favor. Leula approached, carrying a cup of water. "Martha says you should drink more," she said, offering it to him. "Helps clear the smoke from inside you." Elijah nodded his thanks, awkwardly holding the cup between his bandaged palms. As he drank, he noticed Leula nervously glancing over her shoulder. "What is it?" he asked, his voice still rough but improving daily. Leula leaned closer. "Master's been asking strange questions about you, about whether you can read or write." Elijah nearly choked on the water. "What did people say?" "Nobody knows anything for sure," she replied. "But there's talk. Master spent all morning in what's left of his study writing letters, and Mrs. Wilks has been talking about you to her sister who's visiting from Savannah." Before Elijah could respond, the back door opened and Martha appeared, her expression unreadable. "Elijah," she called, "Master Wilks wants to see you in his temporary office now." Leula's eyes widened and she quickly took the cup from him. "Lord have mercy," she whispered. Elijah stood slowly, his heart suddenly pounding in his chest. Being summoned to speak directly with Master Wilks was unheard of. Such meetings usually meant punishment or being sold. "Do I need to change?" he asked Martha, looking down at his simple clothes. Martha shook her head. "Just come as you are." "And Elijah," she hesitated, then added, "speak clearly and look at the floor, not his face. Whatever he asks, answer truthfully but briefly." The walk to what had been the morning room, now Master Wilks' temporary office, felt longer than the entire plantation. Each step brought Elijah closer to a conversation that could decide the rest of his life. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "White folks' gratitude is like morning dew." At the door, Martha left him with a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Elijah took a deep breath, wincing at the lingering pain in his lungs, and knocked softly. "Enter," came Master Wilks' voice from within. Elijah opened the door and stepped inside, keeping his eyes lowered as instructed. The room smelled of pipe tobacco and the strong brandy Master Wilks drank during stress. Through his downward gaze, Elijah could see polished boots and the edge of a desk covered with papers. "Approach, boy." Elijah moved forward until he stood before the desk. "Look at me," Master Wilks commanded, breaking the first rule Martha had given him. Slowly, Elijah raised his eyes to meet his master's gaze. Jonathan Wilks sat rigidly in his chair, his face composed, but his eyes showed the strain of the recent days. He studied Elijah with an unsettling intensity, as if seeing him for the first time. "The doctor tells me you'll recover," Master Wilks began, "though your hands will bear scars." "Yes, Master," Elijah replied, unsure if a response was required. Master Wilks leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together beneath his chin. "You saved Mrs. Wilks' life. That fact cannot be denied." Elijah remained silent, sensing that more was coming. "Such an act," Master Wilks continued, "raises certain questions about your character, about your future usefulness to this household." He paused, his gaze still fixed on Elijah's face. "I find myself in an unusual position. The natural order of our society dictates that your kind serves mine, yet I now find myself indebted to you." The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Elijah fought the urge to shift his weight or look away. "Can you read, boy?" Master Wilks asked suddenly, the question cutting through the tension like a knife. Elijah felt a cold fear grip his spine. Teaching slaves to read was against the law in South Carolina. The punishment was severe, whipping at best, the mutilation of fingers or hands in some cases. "No, Master," he answered truthfully, for while he recognized some letters and had practiced them, true reading was still beyond his skill. "But you want to," Master Wilks stated, not asked. "I've seen you watching when Mrs. Wilks reads to the children. I've noticed how you linger when there are papers around." Elijah swallowed hard, denying it would be useless and could be seen as lying, a punishable offense. "Yes, Master," he admitted softly. To his surprise, Master Wilks nodded, as if confirming something he already knew. "Mrs. Wilks believes you have unusual intelligence. She has suggested a rather unorthodox path forward." Master Wilks rose from his chair and walked to the window, his back now to Elijah. "The fire has changed many things, Elijah, not just the structure of this house, but perhaps its future as well." He turned back, his decision apparently made. "You will no longer work in the fields or as a general house servant. Instead, you will become my personal attendant. You will learn to manage my correspondence, maintain my schedule, and eventually—" He paused, carefully measuring his next words. "You will learn to read and write in secret." Of course, Elijah couldn't stop the sharp intake of breath that escaped him. Such an opportunity. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos.